Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do, which I should always do before I start working, is open up GitHub and just make sure I'm up to date. So you can see where it says fetch origin, it says I haven't fetched anything for 14 days, which makes sense because last week we were online instead of in person, so I wasn't using this computer. So I want to make sure I'm synced up with what I was working on at home. So I'm just going to click here. And so you can see I have 2 updates. So I'm going to pull those down. And if there was any conflict, so sometimes when you do that, you'll get a conflict, something that you made on another computer or at home doesn't match what you have on this computer, or it doesn't know how to put them together. If you see a conflict, usually you just have to make some edits and kind of say that this is what I want. But if you see a conflict, let me know. We can work on it together. But most of the time, I don't think that you'll see a lot of conflicts. So now I'm up to date. And I can go back in here, and I can see that I actually did make a couple updates. So if I want to go into my history, I can review the changes that occurred. So I added some models here. So we can see the pigeon model that I added last week and the pool model. And I made a modification to my level, which was adding those models into the level. And then I have another update where I think I just made, these are probably just modifications I made that are different. So some of the files, when you look at the changes, you'll be able to see them like to this project. But some of the files like our models, since they're very large files and they're binary, GitHub doesn't actually know, is not going to be able to display the difference. But that's okay. So we can make sure we're up to date, and then we can open our project. So I'm going to go back to the Finder, go to my game, and open this up. And if everything worked out, I should be synced. So the pigeon that I added to my game when I was at home last week should be here. You can see there's some changes to the setup of the window as well, which it downloaded from my home computer, so I kind of have to reset the windows a little bit, but that's okay. And so there we see the pigeon over there. And so it looks like everything is up to date. So that's good. So now what I want to do, so since we're working on our first level, when we start to add in obstacles and challenges, one of the things you might use is some platformer mechanics. So you might have like different platforms that the player has to jump to. So let's imagine that our pool was kind of like over here a little bit. And so part of the challenge is jumping to the pool from our main platform. So right now, if I try to do this and I don't make it, that's not a very hard jump. Let's bring it out a little farther. Okay, so if I try and I don't make it, I'm just going to fall. And I'm just going to fall forever because we don't have any mechanism to reset the player. So this is a good thing to add when we start doing user testing, because this is going to be annoying for our users. They're going to have to reset the whole scene just to play it again. We don't want them to have to do that. And it'll also be a good chance to go over a couple of things. So let's add in, so we're actually going to add in a new script and a couple components for our respawn. So let's start. The first thing that we need to add in here is we just need a point in our scene where we want the player to respawn. So this is called a spawn point. It's a point that we create that doesn't really look like anything. There's nothing there, but it's a point in our space that we use to sort of reference as this is where the player should go when they respawn. So I'm going to click on my level, and I'm going to add, and this is just going to be an empty node 3D. So it has a 3D position, but it doesn't have anything else. And I'm going to rename this, so I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to call this spawn point. And you might have multiple spawn points for different things that you want to add into your scene, but for now I just want one spawn point for the player, so I'm not going to, I could name it player spawn point. That actually might be, or really, if I want to be really specific, it's the respawn point. It's where we want to respawn if we fall off the platform.
It's a regular node.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a node 3D.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's okay.
that's okay. And so we might want to just go back to where the player starts. So I could find the player and look at their transform and just copy. So it's x is 0, y is about 2. Let's just set this to 2. So it's nice and round, and z is 2. So I'll just go to my player respawn point and type that in. So 0x, 2y, 0z. And so that'll respawn our player right back where they started. So now what we want to do is create something to sort of catch the player if they fall out of the world. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm going to go with a very basic, simple way. I'm just going to make an invisible collision shape. And so if the player hits that collision shape, then we'll respawn them. So I'm going to make a collision shape. And I'm just going to make it a box. Oh, I need an area. Whoops. Okay, let's start with an area, because it has to describe something. So let's start with an area. So this is a area in our scene that we can interact with, but we're not going to collide with. So then I'll add my collision shape. And so then I'll just make a box. And let's move the box down. So I'm going to take my Area 3D and move this down here. And so we're not going to be able to see this, but we can see it in our editor. And what we want to do is we just want to make this big enough that our player can't fall through it. And so basically our physics engine is like moving stuff around, and if it's like lagging or if it's going too fast, if our player passes through the box during a frame where the physics engine like doesn't calculate it, then it won't trigger. So we want to make it nice and tall. And obviously we want to make it wide enough that the player will run into it. So I'm going to go to my collision shape and click on the box, and I'm just going to make it like really big. So I'm going to make it 100x. That's not even really big. Let's make it 1000x. Okay, so that's going to be big enough. And we'll do 1000 on z. Okay, so now there's very little chance that our player, especially given the scene that we have, can pass through this box. But now we want to make it not 1000, but like maybe 20 on y. So it's nice and tall. So I'm going to go back to the Area 3D. Let's lock our collision shape. Go back to the Area 3D and just move this down. And so you can put this wherever you want, but when our player runs into this, they're gonna respawn. And actually, I'm gonna make this shape even bigger. I'm gonna make it like 50. And I'm gonna lock that again. And then let's just call this our respawn mesh. Okay, so if our player falls through here, we're gonna notice it, and we're gonna respawn the player to the respawn point. So to do this, we're actually gonna add a script. So this is gonna be a new script that I haven't written yet, but it's very, very simple. And so it'll be a good chance to go over how you would start writing a script. But what I will do when I'm done with the script is I'll add it to the GitHub, and you guys can download it from the upstream if you wanna just download it that way. But you can also just, write it or copy and paste it. Okay, so for our respawn mesh, first we need to detect when the player enters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a script here. So I'm going to go to the script area at the very bottom of the inspector, and I'm going to create a new script. And I'm going to click on here and go back to the parent folder and go back to the main folder. I want to make sure this is in my scripts folder so that it's nice and organized. It's easy to find. So I'm going to open up my scripts folder, and I'm going to just call this respawn player. And I'm going to click create. So the nice thing about Godot is it kind of does some stuff for me right from the beginning with my script. One thing is that this first line here extends Area 3D. It basically knows what type of node that I'm adding the script to. And so it uses that as the main node, and that gives me access to all the different properties that are in that node. So if I look this up, if I go to look up symbol, this will show me all the documentation for the code that I can use. And so you can see all these different things like properties, like you can see, let's see. Oh, well, these are specific to our area. But let's go back. So it has like all of the properties associated with all of these different types of nodes. So for example, my node 3D, it has a bunch of things like a position, rotation, all these things that we can edit in the editor are also part of the script. So it gives us all of those things already when we use this extends area 3D. Then inside our script, there's two functions. There's a ready function. This is called once when the game starts. So you can like position things or add them to groups or do different things. And then there's a process function which runs as the game is running to update different things that are happening. We actually really don't need these, so I'm just gonna delete these. And what we really need to do, I'm gonna close these things. All we really need to do is detect if our player enters this area. So there's an easy way to do that. If I click on my mesh and then I go to this node section over here, there are these things called signals. Signals are things that we can use to communicate between what's happening in the game and our scripts or other components. And my player is a character body. So what I can do is I can say there's this signal called body entered. And so what I can do is say if a body enters into this area, then I want to reset that body. So I'm just going to double click on this. There we go. Okay, let's try that again. So I'll double click on this. And what it's going to do is it's going to ask me where do I want to connect this signal to. And so I need to find the script that I'm working on. So it's connected to this script right here. And it's going to create a function for us called onBodyEntered. This is just where we get to say what we want to happen when this occurs. So I'm going to click connect. And so now we know that the player has entered this area. And basically all we really want to do is set the position of the player to the respawn position. So there's a couple things we need to do this. Okay, so when I'm writing code, one thing I can do to take notes is what's called a comment. And so I can put a pound sign or a hashtag sign there, and then I can write whatever I want, and the code will ignore this. So what I'm going to do is write out what I need this function to do. So if player enters, reset position to respawn point. Okay. And if this goes over the end, I can just hit enter and add a thing here. Okay. So one thing we need to know is what is the respawn point. So we need to use a value to save that. And then once we have that, so we're going to say, we're going to use a variable. So a variable is just a place in our code to store a value. And so we're going to call this the respawn point. And we're going to have to put something in here. So normally I would write this out and then connect everything in Godot. But Godot actually has a thing where we can just drag what we want directly in here. So if I click on this player respawn point and I drag it right here, it's going to add this thing right here. Although it doesn't do that exactly how I want. It should add an export. Maybe I have to hold option. No. Okay, that's not exactly what I want. So what I really want, I thought that it would do this for me, but what I really want is I want a variable to store this respawn point. But I want to be able to set it in the editor. So a way that I can expose this variable to the editor is by adding @export in front of this. So now, if I go back to the inspector and I click on my script, it's going to add this section. Actually, it doesn't work right now because my script has errors in it. But oh, I still have arrows in it. Oh, I need a type. Okay, so the type I'm looking for is a node 3D. Okay. Huh. That's weird. It should be able to... Okay. Let's say... just node? Is it like that? Okay, there we go. So now we can assign this. I don't know why that was an error before, but we can assign this respawn point. So now I can drag this over here, and now it knows where that respawn point is. And I can put anything in there. So if I use this script in a different level and I change the respawn point, I just drag in the new respawn point. Okay, so now we know our respawn point. The next thing we need to do is just set the player position. So I'm going to say body, which is our player, dot position equals respawn point. And that's it. That's the whole script. We're going to set one more setting just to make this a little bit more useful. But let's test that and see if it works. So I'm going to run my scene. And now if I fall off the edge, instead of falling forever, I should respawn, unless we got an error. We did. It says... Oh, sorry. Okay. So this is a node. I can't just set it to a node. I have to set it to the position of that node, obviously. So body.position equals respawn point.position. That's what I needed to write. So now let's try it one more time. And we should get respawned. There we go. So I get reset back here. And you can see I'm falling for kind of a while, so you can just move the area closer to the player if you want that to happen. So it's unlikely at this point that this would happen, but one thing you can do to make sure that other things don't get respawned if they happen to fall into this area, like if you add some, like, I don't know, bouncing balls or something like that, what we can do is look at our area and go to this collision section. And in a later lesson, I'm going to go into a lot more depth about this whole section, the layer and mask. But every collision object in our game, so anything that is an area or a body or a static or collision shape, whatever it is, they all have a collision area. And this basically just tells the game engine what to look out for. So certain things are going to interact with each other, so we need the game engine to look for them to interact. But some things don't ever need to interact with each other. And to save on performance so that our game engine isn't doing all this extra work to see if two things are colliding that don't need to collide, we can basically tell it what to look out for. So our player is going to be on this default layer for the player, which is layer 1. And if we want to give these layers names, we can click on this menu and go to Edit Layer Names. And so I'll call the player Layer 1. And so now I can see there's the player and there's this mask. So the layer is what the thing is on, and the mask is what other things is it looking for. So for my respawn mesh, I can just turn off this layer, so it's not on a layer at all, and I can set the mask to player. And actually, the new Godot, this might not work, but let's test it real quick. So I'm going to jump off. We might have to give it a new layer. No, that works. Okay. So as long as this respawn mesh is looking for the player, it's going to find it. And nothing else, if it's on a different layer, will interact with this. So that's going to make it work a little bit better. Mesh doesn't really make sense for this. Why did I call it mesh? This is just our respawn area. Okay. All right, so there's a few different things that are all kind of wrapped up into that, and so we're going to go into a little bit more depth, especially with the collision stuff, in another lesson soon, and we'll hopefully do some more scripting at some point. But this is a very sort of simple script to get started on. It's really, it's only like 3 lines of code basically, so that's kind of a good way to have a little bit of an intro to scripting, but if you want to download this from GitHub rather than typing it, what you can do, I'm going to upload this to the GitHub. So I'm going to go to GitHub desktop. And so now you can see there's a few changes that were made. So there's a completely new script, so it's all green. There's some changes made to level 2, but it's a big file, so we don't see it. And there's a couple changes I made to project.godot, which doesn't really matter that much. I should probably not even commit this. So I'm just going to commit this script. So I'm going to uncheck these. I just want to commit this script. That way you guys can download it and add it to an area if you want to use it. So I'm going to say adds respawn script. And I'm going to commit that to the main project. And then I'm going to push to the origin. And so now, if I go to my repository on GitHub, you're going to see there's a new commit that says adds respawn script. And you're going to be able to download this. So if you want to download this, the easy way to do it, if you go to your branch, I created this, so I just see one, but you're going to see two things here. You're going to see the main, and then you're going to see something called the upstream. If you change to upstream and then do a fetch, you'll grab those changes that I just made, and it'll just add it into your scripts folder, and then you can either use it or not. You can also just write the script on your own, but this way, you can update those changes. And then, if I add future scripts in future lessons, you'll be able to grab them that way as well. So that's it for this part. I'm gonna go straight into the user testing stuff, but if you guys have questions about this now, let me stop the video actually.